All right, welcome everybody. Sean Reynolds and Ken Weave from Sportsnet here with you for our weekly daily dose of our long-form podcast. Episode 9, Ken? I keep losing track on this. I know I have it. It'll say, if you're watching this, it'll say out there whatever episode it is. I believe it's episode 9. Got a great episode coming up where we get to catch up with some people. Mike Zeisberger catching up with us. We're going to bring him in around 9:10, and then Chris Cuthbert coming in at around 9:35. And it's funny, I texted Zeiss right before we got on here, Kenny, that we've kind of been in the whole COVID world, and we've been missing everybody. We're kind of using this show as an excuse to just hang out with our buddies who we haven't seen for a while. We did it with Sammy Cosentino last week, and I said that to Zeiss. I was like, more than anything, it's just an excuse for us to get on and hang out with you because we haven't seen you for so long. So it's been fun to do that. Zeiss is a great guy who you've known far longer than I have, but in the short time, and I guess it's been 5 years or something like that, feels like a short time that I've known him. Just one of the greatest guys that you will meet in this industry. So super happy to catch up with him. Before we get there, though, we should talk about some, current news and business. I mean, talked about it, the COVID situation. We're right in the heart of kind of trying to get, the jabs, the needles in the arm. And I'm proud to say, and I know you're proud to say, you shared it the other day, we are 2 people who have gone out and got the first dose of our vaccine. Both of us, AstraZeneca, you got? Is that what you got?
Yes, AstraZeneca as well.
AstraZeneca,
Only thing available to me at 46, even though we've been celebrating birthdays on every episode, and somebody joked that it was happy 64th, I think, last night. But yeah, you know what? It was an important week. And I mean, I know that there's been some, consternation and concern about potential blood clotting or things of that nature. But I'm happy to report that I had absolutely zero side effects. I was fortunate enough that I know that your situation was slightly different. But I mean, for me, I felt, I went in and honestly, I was never great with needles growing up, but I've gotten better over the years. But, I went in, handed in my form, waited a couple minutes. The doctor called me in. And he was able to, swabbed it up, and it was over before I knew it. Basically, it was one of those things where you're concerned, how is it going to hurt? Classic. You're going back to your younger days, but no pain and nothing but gain to be had here. Obviously, we know this is a stressful time, especially with the third wave kind of ramping up, and just felt it was important. And again, really fortunate on Monday when the news came out that it was available for folks 40 and over, that was able to book an appointment quite easily. Through the Sobeys website, and went to Freshco on Fermor and St. Anne's, and just wanted once again thank all those folks on the front lines for everything that they're doing, and it feels good. I mean, again, you always have a little bit of concern about how you're going to feel after, and I didn't feel lethargic. I felt great all the time, the whole way. Again, I'm fortunate to have no side effects. I know some folks they have had some side effects, but I think it's important. It's an important step in this process, and I feel fortunate I was able to have that take place this week.
Well, I'm glad that we kind of bring 2 different perspectives, because I had the side effects. I mean, that evening, I got it around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That evening, around 9-10 o'clock, started setting in, a little bit of the body aches, a little bit of fever, felt really, really cold, went to bed, I had a good sleep, but woke up in the morning, was feeling the same way, kind of went through that process. I think we were at the rink that day. I saw you, said I was feeling the symptoms. And I mean, it wasn't anything I couldn't operate with. But the symptoms were definitely there. Lasted about 24 hours. They cleared up that evening. I popped a couple of Advil once or twice, and that seemed to totally take care of it. But you know what? I mean, the side effects were there, but you brought it up before, that big concern. I think we end up getting the AstraZeneca, and it gets opened up because there's a sense of the community that isn't interested in getting that. They're kind of doing the vaccine shopping, which, I mean, I don't know. I've got potential issues with that, and the idea that, so you're just you don't want to take a risk, so you're going to pass it on to someone else to take that risk. I mean, I'm not down with that. I got to say, I'm proud. That's how I had the name screwed up because that the tag on social media was Gen AstraZeneca, essentially opening it up for our generation, the ability to go and get that thing. And I got to say, I'm pretty proud of the way that we handled that, the way that our generation kind of hopped in line right away and gobbled that kind of stuff up. You talked about the blood clots. I'll say this, when they were talking about the science coming out and saying, a woman who is on the birth control pill is 10 times more likely to get blood clots than someone getting that shot. I mean, I can tell you, a lot of the women in my life through the years have been on the birth control pill. And I got to say this, like, if I'd feel quite cowardly if I was not willing to take that risk that, so many women in my life had taken over the years. So, I mean, when I had the opportunity, it was roll up the sleeves, get out there. And I do have to say, I kind of like how that worked because, Bartley Kivas is a good friend of mine, works at CBC. Super smart guy. I mean, every time I needed answers on stuff like that, I give him a call and kind of chat with him and had questions about the rollout and how it's going, the difficulties that the government seems to be having right across Canada and getting needles into arms. I thought this was an opportunity to kind of throw it to the public and say, we're having trouble getting through this. Can you go and take this, right? It's not, served up on a silver platter for you. Like you said, you kind of went vaccine hunting is what you did. I did the same thing. I went to a couple of different pharmacies to go and see if I could get in. And, you take it on your shoulders to go out and find one for yourselves. The opportunity to do that, I thought was good that they did that. And it made me feel personally, I don't know about you, Ken, it made me feel like I had a hand for the first time in kind of trying to solve this problem that we're in. It made me feel like I could go out and do something to help the COVID situation, and having that little bit of control for the first time since this started felt really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's a proactive, element to that as well, right? Because for a lot of this, we've just been kind of at the liberty of the health orders, and, just basically do what you're being asked to do. So in this case, when there were those, vaccines available, it was the impetus was on to sort of step forward and do what you could to help get more jabs in the arm, if you will. So again, just hope it's one more step closer to normalcy. Again, we're very fortunate in terms of what we do. We're able to cover the sport that we love and, have that element in our lives. But I mean, obviously we know it's a little bit different in terms of how the coverage is being handled, but still, I just feel it was another, one more step closer to getting towards the finish line. We know the finish line is still a ways away, but as Lynette says, I mean, getting, protection is the important thing. And I think that's what we were both able to do. And we're both super, super happy to be continuing on toward that path. And want to encourage folks who are looking. I mean, and again, we know that appointments went quickly, and it's still going to be a process. And getting your second shot is still going to take some time. But one step at a time, and let's continue to do our part where we can.
I'm loving to see everyone here in the chat room, and that everyone was jumping out there and getting it. It's and fully vaxxed here. Jalapeno cheese, phenomenal job. That's good to see that. I mean, boy, oh boy, the day we can put this behind us and then start talking about doing doing these shows, Ken, we do them live every time, and it's kind of hard to get out and do them any different, the program that we use. But man, maybe one day if we could take this out and actually do these things in a place and have, interaction that we have with our audiences here, but also kind of around us. That's a day we're kind of looking forward to. Were you surprised at all the response by the Jets players when asked about, Robin Lehner, goaltender for the Vegas Golden Knights, showing a lot of frustration about the fact that they've all been vaccinated and they want life to go back to normal and they're not getting there. And I entirely get the idea of the competitive advantage involved in that. If you can suddenly go out and live your life normally and get out of the kind of mental health grind that we're seeing from these Canadian teams, I personally do think it creates a competitive disadvantage and would put teams in the North at a disadvantage. So I was expecting the Jets to maybe respond a little bit differently, but no, they seemed to be wholehearted behind the idea of if those guys are in a situation where they can get out of this, let those guys out of that. And I thought it actually showed a lot of empathy by those guys all being in the same situation. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting. I mean, it's hard to kind of, I don't think this is a picking sides scenario. I mean, obviously, Andrew Kopp made it pretty clear that he didn't think it was a competitive advantage and it should be part of, living your life. We know this has been a challenging season for all players, whether you've had a vaccination or we assume that most people in Canada have not because they're not eligible. So, again, I think you'd like to see some relaxation. We know that, the NBA and I think MLB, they've sort of made some incentives for their players, but again, you also understand where you do want to have a level playing field, but I just don't think it's going to be level for anyone this year. So I hope there's a time sooner than later where some of those restrictions are relaxed for those folks. But for right now, I guess for me too, it was mostly a hypothetical conversation. I mean, that's not available for people, so they're going to continue to be, for the teams in Canada. I mean, so I don't know. It's an interesting one for me, Sean. I think that the sooner, like we've just been talking about, the sooner that everyone can get back to living their life, the better. But at the same time, the disease will tell us when it's safe to do so.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder though, the idea of the advantage that you would get out of that, because I mean, I do think the Jets have done a good job of kind of talking about what they've been going through, and how it's been affecting them. And I'll say this: give them credit for the idea that they're never saying, oh man, we're in this terrible situation. They always couch everything they say by saying, I mean, we're going through exactly what you're going through, right? I do think that theirs is maybe a step up above and beyond what ours is. And when I say ours, I guess I'm talking specifically about you and I. We go down to the rink and we cover it. We're outside the bubble. So I think there's a little bit of a more level of freedom, but they're quick to say, and I want to be quick to say, there's people in this situation who are out of work and businesses that are struggling. And so they're always very quick to point that out and not hold their situation above anyone else's. They'll say time and time again, they're happy to be playing, happy to have jobs, happy to be able to do what they love to do, and that should be enough. But I mean, the mental grind of a hockey season is tough. It's been made tougher this year because everything has kind of been put together, and the release valves that you find in any job where there's high intensity and you got to kind of raise your level to that intensity, and the trade-off, or the thing that allows you to survive those kind of jobs, is your ability to come down off that and find that space. Do you think that space where those hockey players have been able to kind of come down off that, get away from the rink, get their minds off that kind of stuff, and kind of find some balance in their life? Do you feel like that has really been non-existent for them this year?
It's been tough, and again, Paul Maurice made it pretty clear he wasn't asking for sympathy, but I just think that there's an element that I just think in our situation, like, look at how drastically our situations have changed, also in terms of what you're able to do, even who you're able to see, with freedom. I mean, if people think it's easy playing on the road, or for players on the road just because they stay in a 5-star hotel, I mean, yes, there are some luxuries that go along with playing in the National Hockey League. Yes, they're flying on a private jet to get around, but it's not about that. It's about the time in between. You're not able to see your family for the most part on the road. If you have siblings or if you have parents in other cities, I mean, you might get to go for a walk outside. I mean, yeah, walks are important. I mean, geez, no one's known this more than me. The importance of going for walks on a daily basis since last March allowed me to help get my health at a level that it hasn't been in 2 decades. So I find on the days that I don't go out for a walk how taxing that can be. So imagine, basically for a player on the road, you're looking at 4 walls in your hotel room. You go down to the meal room, you go to the rink. You're not doing anything else. I mean, some guys probably are on FaceTime a lot. The ones, whether it's with family. Andrew Kopp talked about the importance of leaning on your friends, whether that also means your hockey friends and your friends in life and your family members. But I just think that it's a challenge that is important to take into consideration for all of the things that we discuss here about hockey players, about how the season's going, about consistency. And I just think I said it on the post-game show. I mean, I think it's important that, a lot of people want to draw immediate conclusions, and that's the society that we live in. But there's a lot of teams and coaching staffs and management staffs that have to be very, very careful in terms of making, big sweeping observations. Of course, you have to observe what you've seen during the pandemic and since last August, or teams returning to practice in late July. But to write players off after that window, yeah, we understand it's now 13 months of this pandemic in Canada, basically, or 13 months since the shutdown. But to suggest that someone's never going to be able to return to a high level, and on the flip side, maybe some people really had peak, use that time, peak efficiency in terms of getting their training up or getting their bodies right and all of those things. So there were some benefits on the side as well for people who were able to, laser focus in. But to think there haven't been side effects on that front, on the mental health front, I just think that that's not a great way to be looking at things overall, because it's just that's just simply not the case.
You bring up an interesting topic, not only with the players, but I think just in life about, how you could handle this situation, because I feel personally, and we've had this conversation, and let's get into it a little bit about the idea of how you could potentially use this time off that we've had, because the front end of my quarantine was a disaster. I mean, and that was the hardest part for me. And a lot of that is going to have to do with the fact that, we weren't working at the time. And when I think of everything kind of turning around for me, it basically turned around when I went to the bubble, right? And started working again in the playoffs last year, and then had a little bit of time off, but knew that the hockey season was coming back. We didn't know at a specific time then, but we had a good idea that it was going to happen around after Christmas. And then we've got into this, and I will say this, it's been a little bit of a grind, especially adding these shows and like we've done. But we love doing this, Ken. Like, we love what we're doing right now. We absolutely love that. So while it's busy, and while there's some nights where you don't get a lot of sleep, last night included, we like this and like doing this, and it's almost therapy. Well, it is therapy, because I can tell you again, the top end of my quarantine was a little bit rough, and I gained a whole bunch of weight. You were in the house, there wasn't a lot to do, and I just you don't realize how much more often you're going to the cupboard to grab a snack and all that kind of stuff, and that was like, I ended up being really, really heavy. And so we'll go, and viewers who've been watching this will know, because we've talked about this, but I ended up losing 40 pounds at some point. So it's interesting for me, because I've seen both sides and both faces of the quarantine and the way that it can affect you. I feel like I ended up turning it into a pretty solid positive, but the top end of it was a fairly solid negative, even though in that time, I was homeschooling my kids, and I'd look at that as an opportunity to have spent time and do things with my kids. I was 1 year away from being a full-time teacher. I was already student teaching in school. So I was able to, that was one thing when I was talking with other parents who were homeschooling their kids, the idea of doing that and getting through it. The one advantage I had was I had two parents as teachers. So I had that kind of guidance from them. My sister as a teacher, and then I was trained to be a teacher and was actually teaching in a school, St. Norbert Collegiate, for a while. So I had that, but that was a difficult time. That was tricky to get through, but it was also an opportunity to do things with my kids that, like, I'll probably look back on that time that I homeschooled the kids, and it was interesting. So it really is an up and down time, and the way that people handle it. I don't want to turn this into it because I was able to find a positive out of this, that I figured out quarantine or anything like that. There's still these really hard days. God, Ken, when I got that shot, there was a sense in me of like thinking, okay, are we almost there? Is this almost over? And I've got this sense of, okay, I'm half done. Shouldn't we be getting to that stage? And I don't know how you felt. I thought we saw a little bit of that from Andrew Kopp and his answer about the Vegas Golden Knights and those guys, and they should be able to open that up. But I mean, for you, is there a light at the end of the tunnel kind of feeling that when you got the jab? Were you at that stage where you were like feeling that, okay, we're halfway there? Does it feel like that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, again, also encouraged by a lot of our colleagues, in the United States who are getting their second shots and, starting to say, hey, right on, I think it's been important. And the other one for me, and I mean, we talk about, the society we live in right now in terms of, the electronics and the ability to stay in touch with folks. And I really found another important element outside of the physical activity and the walks was was connecting. I mean, I understand we're mostly in an area where lots of people love texting instead, and they don't want to have a lot of interaction. I've always been someone who enjoys talking on the phone, and I can sometimes be occasionally difficult to get off the phone, as we have occasionally seen on our shows here. But that ability to connect with people that, I mean, again, we talk about all the time. In my former jobs, I've been spending 7 to 10 days a month on the road, and when you have 4 a.m. wake up calls, and you're constantly running from home to airport to hotel to arena, grab a bite to eat in the middle, you lose a lot of time for some of those personal interactions. I mean, yes, you can text people on the back of an Uber, but you're not having those same kind of phone calls. So for me, I mean, at the beginning, I found that whether it's one call a day or you try to, to connect with as many people during the week as possible, kind of like make your way through the contacts book, make those calls that you always wish that you had time for. I feel that that's been a really valuable part of the quarantine for me. And again, some days you might need the boost, and other days the person that you're calling might need the boost. And you just don't know that without picking up the phone. So again, we understand that some people may not have as much time. And I mean, hey, I went through a very difficult situation professionally. I was laid off in June, and I was fortunate to be picked up by Sportsnet on a contract basis shortly thereafter. But I mean, again, that was a pretty big blow to be going through during a pandemic, and certainly felt some of those effects. But at the same time, that's why you got to tap into your support network, and that really helped. The encouraging messages that I received, and the kind of people that you find out that are in your corner. I mean, that was a big part of quarantine time for me as well, and I'm super appreciative of all that. And like you said at the beginning, I mean, the show has been a great way to be able to connect with the people that we would normally be seeing on the road, and having those conversations, and maybe going to dinner with, and things that seem like you don't want to say we took them for granted at the time, but it's changed so much with the way things are going right now, right? I mean, that's just something that you can't really do as often or with any frequency based on the restrictions and things like that. And again, we know that we have a lot of friends in the restaurant industry, and we know it's been a tough time. So again, if you can support them with takeout or whatever way that's possible, I mean, those are important things, because when the pandemic is over, you certainly want to be able to go to your favorite restaurant again. And again, we know it's also tough because people's financial situations are impacted by COVID as well. So I mean, you just hope that people can continue to push through wherever they can, and again, be there to support your friends, support your family members as best you can, and we'll all get through this together. And I mean, I'm not trying to give people a pep talk, but I know that it's been a tough time, and we know there have been times where it looked like we were already out of it. 12 days of 0 cases, right? I mean, that was last summer. So now we were getting close to looking like we were closing in on getting a great handle on it. And then now you have a day like Scott Billick is on here, he's reporting the numbers. I mean, big numbers yesterday. You don't want to be getting back to the situation where it's 200 plus or close to 300. We want to get those things into double digits and then single digits, and then continue to do what we can to be safe. We understand the frustration completely, Sean. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Everyone's felt it. Even, I mean, again, I try to be about as sunny a disposition as you can have. It's not a glass half full for me. It's a glass like 15th, 16th full. But again, there's some days where, you just weren't feeling it. So I just think, again, whatever you can do to lean on your support network and try to provide a boost and a lift for someone during their daily routine, people will appreciate it.
Yeah, Ken, I got to say this personally. I have a ton of admiration for how you've handled your situation here. And I got to say, you coming over to Sportsnet for me was huge. And we've talked about this off camera before, but I've got all the respect in the world for you as a journalist, and the opportunity to work with you the way that we do now has really been, again, one of the exciting parts about this last year for me. We've spent a lot of time, kind of crafting out what we wanted to do here, had this idea, kind of birthed it, and just kind of wanted to get out and just get out in front of people and interact with people. And this is, to me, this is one of the examples why. I mean, Roger saying here that, his situation. I mean, Roger, we see him hop on our show all the time and asks great questions and helps drive our conversation. And, when you start to see that these are some of the situations that people are going through, you realize how tough it is. What's the term? Sandy here has been coming and bringing, she's been with us right from the beginning, bringing our stuff. Sandy will know I have a dog because of the one episode where the dog was barking in the background and no one was home and I couldn't get the dog to shut up without getting up and leaving, and I wasn't going to do that. But what's the term that they use on on social media? I feel seen. When Sandy makes this comment, I personally feel seen because I have 2 dogs, and I mean, part of our routine being stuck in the home here is my wife is works for the government and is working from home. Noon we grab the dogs and you go for that hour-long walk every day, and it's kind of like started building in these healthy routines in your life and getting the dogs going. Although I've heard that, this is funny, just a side note, I've heard dogs on average have been getting fatter during the pandemic. And the reason, everyone thought their dogs would get healthier because they're getting more exercise and everyone's walking the dog. And that's true. But because we're sitting at home, you're going and you're at work, you're home instead of at work, you're giving them treats more often than you do. So you're giving them the high calorie kind of treats all the time. And I noticed my dog, who is always in really good shape, is getting the exercise, but he's actually getting a little bit chunkier. I thought that was funny, just a side note. But also Sandy putting here, her and her fella lost quite a bit of weight, 30 pounds and 60 pounds doing keto and intermittent fasting. That's amazing. I mean, I gotta say, and I don't know, while we're on the topic, I did, you know what, we should actually, Mike, I think, is hopping into the show here. So we should bring him on here and get what time we can with him. Yes, we're going to let him get his camera figured out. I just wanted to say quickly, intermittent fasting was part of what I did, Ken. I don't know if you did it. I don't know if you did the keto. I think I did tenets of keto. But one of the things that I was afforded to me by the time that we had off is I hit like an exercise routine every single morning, 6 days a week it was a 9-week program. And I got to say, I wouldn't have had the space to do that had I been going to work normally. So I just got to say, I mean, the quarantine did in the end provide an opportunity. And I was glad to be able to take advantage of it. We're going to bring in Mike Zeisberger here right off the bat. Zeiss, I know you're having some trouble getting on, but we're happy that you are on. Love having you on because we love you as a storyteller. And as a storyteller, I was told, checking around with some of the people in the industry, I need to get your opening day Blue Jays story because I hear it's a good one. You got into a little bit of trouble in it. I'm told you'll know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So what do you got with that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and my apologies once again. My technical genius goes pretty much ended with the Walkman in the 90s, so or was that the 80s? But no, it's great to see both you guys. Miss you a lot on the road. We're all kind of slogging our way through this, but yeah. So this was in the early 90s when I covered the Blue Jays, and the Blue Jays had just paid a lot of money to given Mike Timlin to be their new closer. And Pat Henkin was coming off being the Cy Young Award winner. So it's opening day. They played the Chicago White Sox. They have a big lead. It gets blown, or they get to within, I think, a run. Chicago does. Henkin has to come out. They bring in Mike Timlin, to shut the door, opening day. The first pitch he throws as a closer was not his number 1 pitch. It was not his number 2 pitch. I don't even think it was his number 3 pitch. It was his number 4 pitch. And a guy named Roberto Martin of the White Sox, he, of the 10-year career and the 12 career home runs, takes Mike Timlin deep on the first pitch he's ever thrown as the bona fide Blue Jays closer. They lose in extra innings. And so, I'm thinking, okay, what lead can I write? I know. And it was, quote unquote, only 161 more to blow. I thought it was good. Paul Maloney, who was the sports editor, who went on to be the sports editor at the Globe and Mail, but was on the Blue Jays beat, said I should retire right there because I would never write a better lead. Shockingly, and I say that tongue in cheek, it didn't go over too well with the players. And Joe Carter did not talk to any Toronto media, well, at least ones without a TV camera, for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And I remember going up to Joe and go, look, I know you're pissed at what I wrote. Here I am. If you have anything bad to say, that's fine. But you should not take that out on my colleagues. And he said, oh, it's not just you, it's all of them. So, you know what? I mean, I presented myself, but you know what? For 30 seconds in time, I was going like, damn, that's a hell of a lead.
No doubt about that.
Zeiss, it brings something up when you tell me that story, and the idea of you going and, one, going and taking your medicine, but two, kind of standing up for your colleagues.
You have to.
Yeah. Well, and so I wanted to get to that because I chatted with Steve Simmons in preparation for talking with you, a really good friend of yours. Steve is a guy who loves to stir the pot. You and him are phenomenal friends who approach the job from very different sides. But one thing that he's always told me about you is that, like, when he does what he does, it can take a lot of people who you think are friends and they may not have your back in those times. And one thing he says about you at all times is that he knows that you're the kind of guy who goes to bat for your friends. Why is that so important in an industry like ours?
Well, especially, Steve and I are good friends, and he did a lot for me when I was young and coming up, and noticed some things in me that I think I knew I had inside as I attacked this business. But you always need somebody to give you that boost. But the reason I do that, I may not agree with everything that Steve writes or says, and I often tell him that, but you know what, when Steve writes his stuff, when he says stuff, he believes it, okay? And that is one thing that I will argue again. You can sit there and say, why is he saying this, where are you coming from this angle, and that's all well and good, but he believes with what he says. He believes with what he writes, and I think that's very important to stick up, because people say, "Oh, he's out there just to stir the what." Well, yeah, but that's because that's what he believes, and I think that needs to be supported, because I just think, and especially now, guys, with social media and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know if you see this sometimes, but I just find that within the media circle, there's a little rivalries that are coming up, that have always been there, but people air their dirty laundry within the media, whether it's on Twitter. That seems to be the social media du jour. The people decide to do that, or like, how can somebody write this? Or I'm not going to get into it, but I actually had somebody tell his subscribers on a link to one of my stories last year, tell his subscribers, don't write this. Don't open this link. It's pure crap. And it was very disturbing, because I'm not going to name names, but this was a person that I've known for 20, 25 years in the business. And anybody that knows me knows that that's not what I'm in the habit of doing. And in fact, the story of the team that I had written about, their PR guy and their general manager phoned me and said, we have no issue with your story, but the beat writer that covers this team did, and it decided to air it on social media, telling them that they shouldn't read it. And that is something that there's a lot of good things with technology. That we work in a wonderful industry, but I find it gets petty like that, and it gets very petty with Steve too. Not nearly to the what I went through was not nearly to the extent of what he goes through, but I mean that's that's the way it is. And sometimes to me that's a little disturbing. So I'm going to support Steve. But, if I think he writes something and I think it's BS, I'll tell him that. And he'll say, no, that's what I believe. And I'll say, you're wrong. He'll say, well, you're wrong. And then we leave it at that. But we don't go on social media and air our dirty laundry. That's just something, maybe I'm old school, but I'm not into that.
Yeah, Zeiss, our viewers and listeners may not know this, but you were one of those supportive people in my life at Post Media for a long, long time when I was covering the American League and wanting to become an NHL writer. And I want them to know.
I'm sorry I failed you on that extent. It's a good thing Sean came in to the rescue.
You and Bob Elliott both looking for jobs for me for quite a long time. One in the NHL, one in the MLB. But one of the things we've been doing in this show, Mike, is talking about the backstory. So for me, I think it'd be very valuable for you to share where your passion for the written word has come from.
Oh, that's easy. I was, even as a kid, when you're in public school, I always had this, I like to write. I like the imagination part of it. It always intrigued me. The first thing I ever wanted to be was a rock guitarist, but you have to be able to play a guitar to be a rock guitarist. So that was out. Number 2 was going to be a hockey player. And the one thing that differentiates hockey from other sports is the fact that, if you're young and you can't skate worth a what, I don't think you're going to make the NHL, okay? Like, you want to be a Major League Baseball player. Well, if you're 8 years old and you can't throw very hard, well, that can come, right? The same as golf. If you want to be the next, Jack Nicklaus like Kenny is, just be 2 holes in one in the same round. Those are accrued skills. But if you can't skate, if you're 8 or 9 years old and you still need training wheels on your blades, it's like, this ain't happening. And so I just, melded the two, and I thought that would be the coolest thing. I love to write. I love sports. What better marriage than that? And, I think my biggest mentor was, even when I was 8 or 9 years old, we'd get the Toronto Star delivered every Saturday, the big thick thing. It was, the phone book looked thin compared to that. And for people that don't know or that are too young, the phone book was something that they send to you with everybody's phone numbers in it. But it was Frank Orr of the Toronto Star. I read him religiously. I know Steve Simmons has said it too, but a lot of the kids in my neighborhood wanted to grow up and be Bobby Orr. I wanted to be Frank Orr. And the fact that when I started in the business and I got to meet my mentor and idol, Frank, and he was so wonderful to me, helped me out. Kenny was talking earlier about, how I kind of boosted his, tried to boost his confidence, because Kenny, obviously, all joking aside, is one of the most skilled people that we have in this business. Frank did the same for me, and I was at the Sun. He worked at a different paper, and he passed away in January. And I think, what I tweeted is sometimes your heroes disappoint you. Frank never did. And I think that's very important that, when you see the young kids coming up into the industry now, and let's face it, both of you guys have been through this. You look at Kenny's career path the last 2 years, for example. This industry is just in such a state of flux. There is nothing guaranteed. That if you can help somebody that genuinely appreciates it, and is going to remember that you did that for them, I think that you get a lot of enrichment out of that, just the way I did out of Frank. So, once again, I made a short story long, but that's how I came about this, and that's why I value this business so much.
Those are good words. You talked about boosting Kenny's confidence. I think you did too good of a job, Zeiss, because sometimes he walks around here like he's the cock of the walk. This guy, I don't know. Hey, you're talking about Frank Orr's influence.
Just strutting around,
You talk about Frank Orr's influence and him being a mentor. I believe you've got a good story about you and he breaking the Gilmore trade to Toronto, don't you?
You really did your research.
He did.
You didn't find that on Google, I'll tell you.
Dogged determination, Zeiss.
Nope.
So I guess it was. I think it was at the end. I'd have to look. I think it was at the end of the or January 2nd. I know I'm going to butcher this. 91 or 92. I want to say 1992. But the Leafs sucked at the time, and I was at the time kind of I'd done a bit of CFL, but back then we had 30 people in our sports department, so like everything got covered. So the Leafs were something that you did, I mean, was I ever going to get a chance to do it? You were just happy to have a job. So Scotty Morrison, the Hall of Fame journalist, who's in was our boss at the time, the sports editor, and I had only done, I think, 1 or 2 Leaf games or anything, and everybody was still off for like holidays, and he goes, go down to the Gardens and cover practice. So off I trotted, and Frank happened to be there, so that was always a comforting, because I had started out doing auto racing and as a beat when I was fired full time at the Sun, and Frank was on that too. So he was my mentor for because of being a hockey writer, but it was ironic that we both covered a different sport just to start out, and I got to know him. So there was a comfort factor. So we're at practice, and I know this is hard to believe, guys, but Frank and I were the only 2 media at Maple Leafs practice. That's how bad they were at the Garden. Yeah, well, it'll get more far-fetched as this story goes along, but
okay.
As you guys know, with your affiliation with Sportsnet, usually these days, a lot of times players find out their trades via television. The trades get broken or that. So, but back then, that wasn't the case. So practice is over. Frank and I go into the dressing room. Tom Watt, who was the coach of the Leafs at the time, comes out and he says, "Gentlemen, pull out your notepads. We just made a trade." Okay. And so, I'm going kind of like, this is cool. My second or third time doing the Leafs, and something big is going to happen. I had no idea how big. He starts naming off names, and it started with Doug Gilmour, and it got into double digits in the names, and it was the big trade with Calgary that brought Doug Gilmour to Toronto. And so he's naming off names, and I'm kind of looking, and I'm going like, well, this can't be right. I mean, who would make this trade? Like it's so one-sided for Toronto. But I'm a young kid. I don't want to say anything. You kind of, I'm still kind of, I don't want to say in awe, but you're just kind of taking in the entire situation. So I look up at Frank. And Frank's got this quizzical look on his face, and he's looking at his notepad, and then he looks up, and then he looks down at his notepad, and he looks up, and then he looks at Watt, and he goes, "Surely, Thomas, you must be missing a few names that are going to Calgary." And he goes, No, that's the trade. And so I'm looking, going like, I mean, this is one of my first Leaf assignments, but I've followed hockey, my entire life, so I know how big this thing is. So. We go over to Gary Lehman, who was part of the trade, who went to Calgary, and we're talking to him. And all of a sudden, one of the local TV guys comes running in. He's late for practice. He immediately goes to Gary Lehman, puts a mic in front of him, and says, "Gary Lehman, Gary, you've been in a slump lately. Can you attribute what's going on here?" And Lehman just looks at us with this disgusted look at his face, and he goes, "This guy has no bleeping clue what's going on, doesn't he?" Guy's asking him about goals and a goal slump, and he has no idea that one of the biggest trades, I believe still in terms of numbers, the biggest trade in NHL history, had just taken place. And I'll end this story with this. There were no cell phones there. So I'm running around in empty Maple Leaf Gardens looking for a payphone. And again, for people that, back to the phone book reference, back in the day, people, there were no cell phones. You just had to find a payphone that was like hooked up on the wall somewhere. So I phone the office and I'm going like to my boss, Scotty Morrison. Scotty, the Leafs just made this huge trade. And he goes, Zeiss, we gave you a chance to go to the Leafs, but you have to act professional. Calm down. Just tell me the trade. And I said, okay. And I started naming off the names when it was done. Holy bleep, that is why. And he's the one that snapped too. So, yeah, it was really cool. And Dougie and I joke about it a lot. But it's really cool because that something like that will never, obviously for so many reasons, never happen again. Because of the technology, because of how good the TV networks are at breaking trades, Twitter, all of that. But to be able to, the biggest trade in NHL history, and my part of it was the coach telling me to pull out your notepad. We just made a trade. It's probably one of the coolest moments that I've ever had in this business. And there's been a lot of them.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Zeiss. Just quickly pivot to what are your impressions of the Jets, not just last night, but this season, and do you see the Jets and Leafs as the two last teams standing in the North Division?
You know what? I always got to put the Oilers in there because, McDavid and Draisaitl. I mean, it's hard to ignore that. I like the way that Darnell Nurse has taken that next step this year. Tyson.
Oh, I think we're frozen here, Kenny.
Barry,
can you hear me?
Especially on the power play, has found he's never going to be that. Sorry, somebody was phoning. I think it was Tom Watts saying, "Why are you telling that story again?" But as far as the Jets go and the Oilers, Tyson Barrie is never going to be the best plus minus guy, but he's been very good on the power play. My biggest thing with the Oilers is I just don't trust Mike Smith going deep. And that's why, I think the Oilers can beat either of these two teams. I think they can beat any team in the league. But it's just finding that consistency. The Jets, I really like the Jets. I would have liked to see the Jets get another defenseman at the trade deadline. But I give Paul Maurice a lot of credit because, outside of Winnipeg, some of their defensemen, I mean, we don't know a lot about them. And I like the way they play. The top six of the Jets, I would put up against anybody in the league. And you know what? I mean, last night, you throw away what happened last night. I mean, Connor Hellebuck is the best goalie in the North Division, if not the entire NHL. So, and you know what? I mean, I thought the Jets did a good job coming back after they were down last night. It could have gone either way, but no, I really like the way that this team plays, and I definitely think that they can make some waves in the playoffs. But again, I think it's easy to say the Jets are going to sink or swim by how well their defense plays, because Hellebuck's going to be good, and their top six. In fact, the way that Kopp and some of these guys are playing, maybe it's top 9.
Zeiss, I got this big book of research on you here that I want to get through. We're not going to be able to do it today. Now that you've figured out the format, you got to promise me that you'll come back on the show and that we can have you back on. I didn't even get to talk about our great night at Ferris Wheelers down in Dallas that the three of us had with a bunch of people. But seriously, I was saying off air, it's a good excuse, us doing this, just to hang out with the people in this industry that we absolutely love spending time with. And when it comes to that kind of stuff, Zeiss, you are right at the very tippy top. You're the guy who has the most friends of anyone in this industry, and spending 5 minutes with you, it's clear why. You're a phenomenal guy. You got to come back. Because I'm just getting started on you, buddy. The research, the book goes deep here. There's stuff we need to know about Mike Zeisberger. So, hey, we really appreciate having you on, and hopefully we can get you on real soon again. Thanks for joining us.
Well, hopefully I can get my Nintendo fixed up and, get my technical stuff there. And, Sean, you did a wonderful job there. You read it exactly the way that I sent that script to you. So thank you very much. I'm not, listen, guys, in all sincerity, I'm not, I don't necessarily agree with this thing that I have so many friends in the business, but I'll tell you one thing, you guys are both at the top of my list, and I very much, miss seeing you guys on the road. So, and keep kicking butt. I mean, this is a great thing that you're doing here, and keep it up. And I'm ready in the bullpen the next time you need me. Okay, I won't
Awesome.
miss my calling this time. Thanks.
We'll come to you real soon. Thanks so much for joining us, Zeiss. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you, guys. Take care and be healthy.
Have a great weekend, my man.
All right, from one great guy, we're going to bring in the next great guy as Chris Cuthbert has taken the time to join us. Cece, so glad to have you on. I know you know Zeiss pretty good. We can see you in the green room getting a laugh out of some of the stuff that he's doing there. But I think we got to get right into the first thing here. And I know you're on the record. You've talked about this, but I kind of want to have the conversation with you about the move that you made. We'd heard a long time in Sportsnet about the potential for you coming over. It always seemed like it was on the verge of happening. When it finally happened, I got to say, like, for someone like me, it was really exciting. You won't remember this. I met you when you were on the picket line back in, I think it's 2004. I was a journalism student in Ryerson, and someone introduced me to you on the picket line. It was the first time I got to meet you, but I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. The decision to come over, go through the decision and maybe go through, what you can tell us about, the close calls and how many times you maybe could have ended up over at Sportsnet calling hockey games.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's a tough act to follow. And I probably rather listen to what happened at Ferris Wheelers than what happened to me. But, you've got the jacket in behind you. And that's always meant a lot to me. That was a career goal. And I did get to wear the powder blue jacket in the 80s. And I guess we transitioned out of them in the late 80s or early 90s. And obviously, it came to an end just shortly after that walk on the picket line. I don't think that was connected, but in some ways, first I should say the move to TSN was tremendous. My football passion was able to burn brightly there, but I always thought at the right opportunity if I could get back to hockey night, and I'd like that opportunity. And when that big 12-year deal was signed and we weren't part of it, it hurt, and there was a void there. And initially, the first group in, I think wanted to start fresh, and I respect that. So I was passed over, and then about 3 years ago, there were some talks and overtures, and it looked like we were coming close, and we got left at the altar. And then I started thinking, man, this probably isn't going to happen. But then the pandemic, and you sit around and you think about your career and what's left to accomplish. And I started doing the math, and I'm not very good at math, but I figured I'd be close to 70 before the rights moved again. And so Rob Corte and I at Sportsnet reconnected, and this time a contract had expired, so a new contract was eligible or whatever, available, and here I am, and pretty pleased about it.
No doubt about that, and we're pleased to have you. Obviously, Chris, we both shared that to you privately, and we wanted to do it publicly as well.
Thank you.
Asked Zeiss a similar question. For me, I grew up around radio. My dad was an accountant at Golden West, broadcasting in Altona growing up. I had a chance to meet Danny Gallivan at one of those sportsman's dinners. For me, I loved play-by-play. But how about for you? Where does your passion for broadcasting come from, and what can you tell our listeners and viewers about how you got started in the business?
Well, I first those Danny Gallivan, that I get shivers just thinking about his calls, and I very early on I was at CJAD in Montreal, and in 1981, and Danny was near the end of his career at that time, and I had to go over to the Forum and the Canadiens offices to interview Irving Grundman at the time. And I went up to the front desk, and they said, your name. And I gave my name, waiting for my opportunity to meet Mr. Grundman. And as I said, Chris Cuthbert, CJAD, I heard this voice behind me and say, "And what a fine addition you are to the CJAD staff." And I just kind of turned around, and there was Danny Gallivan. And of course, had a few chances to talk to Danny, but I was always in such awe that I regret never having the opportunity to really to grill him about the broadcast business and the craft, and that was a missed opportunity, and I feel bad about that. But I'm sure your listeners, well, I don't know, but I'm assuming that back in the day, KMOX was one of those radio stations from the States that seemed to go everywhere. And every night that the St. Louis Blues were playing, I had a radio under my pillow, or if the Leafs were playing and Foster Hewitt was, but more specifically, Dan Kelly was a voice that I went to bed listening to on a lot of nights. And he was, for me, that other voice of great influence. And so I wanted to be in play-by-play. I got a chance to get started at Queens. We got to call Queens football and Queens hockey games. And at the time, not a lot of people got the opportunity to get a play-by-play tape together. And I sent one out to Yorkton, Saskatchewan, to CJGX, and became the voice of the Yorkton Terriers for a year. Ken Danico was on that team. Joey Kosar was not on that team. They held him back because it was going to get rough, and they didn't want to stick a 15-year-old, although Danico was 15, but they knew Joey Kosar would probably get too involved too early in his career. So I only tell that story because the very next year, Joey Kosar was on the Yorkton Terriers along with Dave Brown. I didn't call that season. I kind of wish I had.
CC, a couple of years back when the Jets were in their 2018 playoff run, there was a big snowstorm down in Minnesota, and the flights got shut down. We ended up having to take a bus down for the broadcast, but I was actually supposed to leave the night earlier and fly down before the storm started. And I got a call from Toronto, Rob Corte, who you were talking about earlier, asking if I'd made the flight down because the crew wasn't going to be able to get in. And I was maybe going to have to call the game. Now, I've never wanted to call a game before. It's never been my interest. I like reporting. I like doing that. But I just thought this was such a crazy situation that all of a sudden I could be like thrown into it and have to call this really important game in Winnipeg Jets history. I only bring up the story. It didn't turn out that way. We ended up all hopping on a bus and getting down there, and I wasn't there anyway. But I only bring up the story because you had a similar moment in your career, did you not, where you were given an opportunity to get into that chair, and it turned out, being a big part of your story and you getting where you are now?
Well, I was a host for the most part in the 80s, and I wanted to be a play-by-play guy. And in 1988, it's hard to believe when you dial back, all the playoff games weren't televised. And Hockey Night in Canada in 88 had decided, well, we aren't going to televise some of these American series, but maybe we can do hits into the intermissions. And so I volunteered. I was hosting Edmonton and Calgary, which was one of the great series and great rivalries, obviously. But I sensed there might be an opportunity to call some play-by-play, so I volunteered on the off day to fly red eyes to New Jersey and Washington to cover that just for intermissions. And the first night I arrived, we got set up. We were actually in the crowd for whatever reason, and I still don't know why. We didn't get a booth in the Cap Center in Landover. And halfway through the first period, they threw to me, and I thought they were kind of doing a test or whatever to make sure everything was working properly. And I started calling the Devils Caps game, and through to the first commercial 5-10 minutes later, and I said, so was the test okay? And they said, no, you're on the air, you're going. And what had happened, and they never did explain it to me right away, but the big game on Hockey Night was Boston-Montreal that night from the Forum, and there was a huge power failure in Quebec, and they could not get the transmission outside the building. And what confused me was while I was going on with my play-by-play, they'd give me scores, and I'd be updating the scores, and I'm thinking, man, everybody in Canada is going to hate me because they're watching this game while the other game's going on. And even I couldn't figure out, well, why aren't we covering that game? Well, I found out later that the forum had its own generator. And so the lights were on at the forum, the game continued, but they couldn't get the signal beyond the forum. And so for 2.5 hours, I was the play-by-play guy, the host for the intermissions. I even had to queue up commercials for the network where, stand by for commercial number 11 or whatever. And and when I left the building that night with the lone producer that was with me, I said, do you think our careers ended tonight? And he didn't. And he didn't answer me, which was not reassuring. But as it turned out, I think people took, they kind of started cheering for because they saw this marathon runner who was all by himself. So that was April 18th, 1988, a long time ago. But it wasn't my first play-by-play, but it was the play-by-play game, I think, that opened the door to me doing a lot more.
That's awesome. I love the story that you mentioned about Danny Gallivan, maybe not tapping into that resource as often. I mean, for me, when I started covering the Manitoba Moose, the guy to my seat to the right was Don Whitman. I mean, he was always such a pleasant man to me, but I feel like I'm with you, CC. I feel like I missed this big opportunity to tap into that resource and just to talk about the industry and, broadcasting in general. So always appreciated those times. But again, kind of looking back, you kind of wish you'd asked for a little bit more. I think one of the people, I've done a little bit of play-by-play for CIS football and a little bit of Allen Cup here and there when I was going to school in Regina. But what's your preparation process like? And are you one of those guys with the crazy chart, or what do you enjoy most about the process of the preparation? Oh, I love it. See, exactly.
I only had it standing by in case you were asking me about the game last night, and I had some notes here. But yeah, that's the chart. It's a 2 or 3 hour exercise, including all the coloring, the fancy coloring. But it's kind of my it's my Linus blanket or whatever. It's a security blanket. It's my briefcase, and they say you don't bring the briefcase to the game. Well, you bring the briefcase to the game, but you don't have to get everything in the briefcase on the broadcast is probably a better way of saying it. And I have a same chart for football, and I was lucky enough in football that most of my games were out west, and I get seated in the plane, and if it was a game in Alberta or BC, I could pretty well take the whole plane trip out to do my chart. So by the time I landed, I was ready to go. And similar last night or the night before when I flew into Winnipeg, I did this on the flight, and for the most part, and again, it's about a 3 hour exercise before every game. And, back in the day when you were doing CIS and I was doing, Queen's Golden Gale games, the preparation wasn't 3 hours a game. But now, if I don't do that, then I don't feel like I'm properly prepared. By the way, I got to say, for you guys, to have Paul Maurice as a resource, and all the coaches are great, but I'm always, I spent the week going through every one of his press conferences, and you learn something about hockey in just about every one. Last night, maybe not as much because clearly he wasn't as happy, but man, it's terrific. And I will say that working with Sheldon Keefe for the first time on a regular basis this year, he's the same type of guy who gives you a lot of insights.
I'll say it time and again. And we talked a little bit about it on our show last night, or maybe it was in the pregame show, Ken. I can't remember. But, Paul Maurice is one of the smartest people that I've ever been around before, and told this story about how Rod Brindamore, I was hosting a game where the Carolina Hurricanes came into town, and I was asking him about Paul Maurice to give me a Paul Maurice story. And his story was that Paul gave him his first chance on the bench. And in his first game on the bench with him, they left in the first intermission and were walking towards the coach's room. And on the way there, about 7 or 8 people stopped Paul to give him some bit of information that they felt was important at the time. And Brindamore was sitting here thinking like he's just getting flooded with all this information. He can't handle this. And then by the time they get into the coach's room, Paul turns around, sits down, and starts to list off in order of importance all the information that just came to him. And he's got a solution for every problem that's been presented to him. even before they get to what they saw out on the game. And Brindamore at the time is sitting there watching, and he thinks, I can't be a head coach in the NHL. No, I'm not this smart. I can't do this. And I said, so how did you end up being a head coach in the NHL? He said, well, I spent a couple of years here and realized no one's that smart. No one can do that other than Paul Maurice. So he's always really good at, kind of giving you something that you can use. Maybe he doesn't give you something at the very heart of what you're going after, and maybe there's things he can't tell you, but he's always really good at giving you something that you can use. So I'm glad you brought that up. I want to switch gears here because
just quickly, I want to say the one criticism of Paul Maurice is he screwed up a great broadcast career. And quickly, I will tell you, I had the exact same story as Rod Brindamore. The very first time I was hired by Hockey Night in Canada, Ralph Ellenby said, go watch Dick Irvin at the Forum hosting the show one night. And I sat in there and they would say, Dick, you got 30 seconds to intro an item or whatever. And he would be perfectly eloquent for 29.5 seconds and stop without a count or whatever, right on the nose. And I looked and thought, I have no chance of ever being a host for Hockey Night in Canada if you have to be as good as Dick Irvin. But fortunately, they allowed you to be not quite as good as Dick Irvin to get on the show.
I think it's always got to start somewhere, doesn't it? We got to switch gears here because or our chat room is going to mutiny on us because you brought up football. About the passion in this market about football. People, you're the last thing they heard when the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won the Grey Cup. Are you worried that you at this point have called the last ever Grey Cup game?
I'm encouraged by the news this week. I certainly hope not. My concern is going forward. How Canadian is the Canadian Football League going to be? And in Winnipeg, you've got two of the real great poster boys for what the Canadian Football League means. And I'm talking about Andrew Harris and Nick Dembski. And these are guys who are terrific football players who anybody would be happy to pay money to watch, but might not have got a chance to play professional football because, if there weren't Canadian quotas, they might not have got their foot in the door. They earn their spot over time, but, it would be like if we went to Austria or Switzerland and there were no quotas on players over there. You could field Canadian teams over there, and what good would it do for the development of hockey in those European countries? Well, America's got such a huge system of churning out football players from a young age, and so our guys start at a disadvantage. Doesn't mean they can't catch up, but the ratio's always provided that opportunity for guys like Harris and Dembski, and I know Chris Getzlaff mentioned that when he came into the league, he probably wasn't ready, but 2 or 3 years in, he was as good as any receiver in the league, and so I'm very big on having a place for Canadians and a place for 3-down football. I don't want to see them wash away 100 years of history because they're going to take a chance on a league that really has not operated for any length of time with any credibility.
Chris, let's go back to that Bombers Grey Cup victory. I mean, you covered a lot of games in this market. You know what it means across the league, of course, but when a team is able to break that long of a slump or a streak, I mean, what's it like to have the responsibility of calling that game, and what was it like to see the passion in the stands again in what was the last game in the CFL that has been played since that time?
Well, it was huge. It was the only team I hadn't called a Grey Cup winner for, and we're not supposed to cheer, but there was a nice storyline. And excuse me, I'll go back for a personal connection. When I started in Yorkton in 1979-80, our lead disc jockey was Stu Jeffries, and Stu was from Winnipeg, and Stu was a huge Bombers fan, and we've always kept in touch. And every year I get this call or email once or twice a season. Is this the year? Is this the year? And and the 2019, he started asking the same question. I think it could be. And then I went through that quarterbacking issue, and then Collaros comes in, and all of a sudden the light is back on. And I really got a sense, and I was just thinking about the other day, that great play, the scramble play by Collaros, who threw in the back of the end zone late in the regular season, kind of was the whole turning point. Once that happened, you thought, man, it's all coming together, and they weren't to be denied in the Grey Cup. And I'm so happy for the organization. When I left to go to Sportsnet, the Winnipeg Blue Bomber staff were the first ones really to reach out. I almost get emotional about it. In fact, I got an email from Mike O'Shea on my first game when I was doing the Jets and the Flames. He said, my wife's listening and wondering what that voice is doing on the hockey game now. And but anyway, I and it was completely accidental, not planned, but there was a stretch pass in that game, and I mentioned it looked like for the Jets for a breakaway goal, and I mentioned it was like Collaros to Adams. And so yeah, my passion for the other sport is always going to be there.
When you talk about the gravity of these moments and the situations you have to get into, and you have to give the proper respect to in that moment, I think about, your Sidney Crosby golden goal call, and I want to kind of dig into how you handle in those big moments the responsibility of making that, or trying to make that, a call that lives forever, like you've done with that. I mean, we refer to that as the golden goal now, because in that moment you were precise in calling it that. Did you have that set up? Was it ready to go? How do you handle those big moments and try to prepare to make sure that your voice doesn't necessarily take it over, but becomes part of an all-time story?
Well, I sort of wish I'd been a little briefer with that. I wish I'd done the Foster Hewitt and just said Sidney Crosby, the golden goal for Canada. But I must admit, I got a little excited. But the golden goal just came out. I was doing mental exercises. I didn't sleep the night before, and it was an early game. I've already told you guys I'm not much of a morning guy, and as the game went on, the adrenaline got me through regulation time, and all of a sudden we got another period, and even though it's the biggest game of my life, I'm trying to stay as alert as possible. I did a radio interview in the intermission, which I never would do, but I wanted to keep my brain going. And after the interview, I was playing around in my head with what to say, and I thought, if this was soccer, the next goal would be the golden goal. And I went, ooh, I like that. And so, and I don't know if you guys remember the 5 overtime game between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and I ended that with that Keith Primo was the marathon man. So I thought, it could have been anybody, the marathon man, and it could have been anybody for the golden goal as well. So I thought, well, that simplifies things a little bit, although I'm not sure I would have used it for a U.S. Golden goal. But sometimes you think about it in advance. I wanted to make sure Milt Stiegel's touchdown record had the right thing. I know there's some Bomber fans that don't like what I said. I said his nickname was the Touchdown Beagle. I was never a big fan of Touchdown Beagle, but I'm thinking, how do we make this a memorable call? And Regal King rhymed with Beagle, so I thought maybe I could jazz it up a bit. And I don't think Milt minded the call. I know there's a few fans that cringe when I said it, but it's all in an attempt to give you something to remember the moment. So yes, and back to Stu Jeffries. I told him months in advance, if the Bombers win the Cup, I'm going to say they finally put the win back in Winnipeg. So that one was kind of a personal one. I've never done that before, but that was a little tribute to a buddy, and I thought Winnipeg fans wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, right on. One of the folks in our comment section, CC, was asking if you had any favorite Don Whitman stories.
Well, Don, there's a million of them. Don used to love playing the numbers game during our meetings. We'd have 10, 12 guys around a table, and he'd pick a number and write it down, and you had to kind of go around the table and guess, and you always had to go if you don't know what the numbers game is, you'd have to, if it was between 1 and 100 and the number was 50, if I said 60 and the next guy said 40, it always would be higher or lower. And finally you'd get to it. Now, somehow Whit he always won the numbers games, or he never lost the numbers game. So he never had to buy a meal. But the other one I would say is in 1986, we were traveling a lot, and Calgary was playing St. Louis, and Whit loved to gamble, and he wanted somehow in an off day to get to Vegas. And we were all kind of putting it off, but finally we said to Whit, if this goes to Game 7, we'll go from St. Louis through Vegas and back to Calgary. So what happens? It's 5-2 Calgary in Game 6, and the Blues score 3 in the third to tie, and Doug Wickenheiser, the late Doug Wickenheiser, scores in overtime. It's 6-5. The Blues have forced Game 7. And I don't think anybody was happier than Whit, because he knew we had this setup where we could, on America West, we could fly into Vegas. We had a 5-hour layover and then up to Calgary. What we didn't know, after losing our shirts, Whit may have won because he never seemed to lose in the casinos. But we left Vegas and we're flying back to Calgary. And this is May 16th, because the game, I think Game 7 was May 17th. The snow hits Calgary like the worst snowstorm ever. I think we were the last flight to land. And there's Don Whitman, John Davidson, Howie Meeker, and myself. And I believe last flight in for that day, and the next day the airport shut. And had we been any later because of our trip to Vegas, we might not have been there on time for Game 7. In fact, Dan Kelly was calling it for the American networks that game, or maybe CTV, because we were doing it for I think the northern Alberta region. That was a kind of a funny rights deal at the time. But Dan Kelly, I don't think arrived until late in the first period of Game 7, because he had been waylaid another way. Dan wasn't going to a casino, but it would have been difficult for us to explain. Yeah, we missed the game because we had that trip to Vegas on the way through. So, and I got one more. Sorry to go long on Don, but Don somehow he left a money clip beside a light, and it set the money on fire. I don't know how he did it, but he had this, and he kept the ashes, and I forget if it was in St. Louis or not, but he took the ashes of the money to a Federal Reserve, and he actually got like a refund. Well, only Whit could have come up with that, but Whit always understood the value of a dollar. So.
I'm glad we brought up Don, because I mean, I love his Donovan Bailey call. One of my favorite calls of all time. But I'm glad we're talking about him, because I kind of put you and him in a category with a guy like Vin Scully, of unique voices that aren't necessarily, that rich baritone kind of generic what you expect from the broadcast guys, right? You've got unique voices, and I wonder how much you've crafted your voices, or you personally crafted your voice into a position that it's unique but not different to the point that it kind of alienates people. I feel like there's a balance there.
Sean, to put me in the same sentence as Vin Scully and Don Whitman, I guess I may have to buy dinner and drink afterwards. But you know what? Not many people are that complimentary of my voice, and I get it. I've gone from I've had people call me in and say, I've wondered if I shouldn't go to a voice coach or whatever, because I'm not in that category, and Vin is the classic of all time great voices, and I consider Whit in that category as well. It's the one thing I think it's just a maturity. I've heard tapes of Danny Gallivan in the 50s, and it sounds a little bit different. Mine is not matured through cigarettes and good rum, but I think just as you get older, I have a different kind of headset that could deafen anybody after 3 hours, but it's my way of controlling my voice, because because very early on I'd lose my voice almost every game. I'd get very thin by the end because I was just screaming and screeching and just so excited to be doing the job. I've learned a little bit more about voice control, but in the Vin Scully category, and some of these guys with those great tones, Al Michaels is another guy that I have. And I grew up with Dick Enberg was another. I mean, I just hung on every word of a guy like Dick Enberg when he was calling football. So, thanks for putting me in the same sentence.
Gotta love that. I mean, I'm so fortunate too. We had KTLA growing up in Altona, so got a lot of Vin games growing up too. So, Chris, I'm also wondering too, I mean, when you're on a national stage, whether it's for CFL or the NHL, what's it like to deal, I mean, in the age we live in with social media, what's it like where everyone thinks that you're cheering for the opposite team? I mean, I'm curious how you deal with that.
You know, it's the hardest part. I somehow got through it in football. I used to get it a lot. Cal Murphy used to be all over me. Oh, you love the Calgary Stampeders. I said, Cal, they go 15-3 every year. And Doug Fluty's passing for 6,000 yards. I'm going to sound like I'm pretty positive of what they're doing on the field. But after a while, I think people got used to the fact that maybe he's not cheering against my team. But I'm noticing that now back in hockey. It's I've stopped looking at the Twitter mentions because apparently I am pro and against everybody's team every night. All we want is an exciting game, and the better the game, the easier it is for us to broadcast. And I spend more time than I should thinking about how even I am. Am I walking the line enough? And I've got a little egg timer that in my head that tells me, okay, you've just told 2 Leaf stories, you better get 2 or 3 Jet stories in, and vice versa. And I feel like now if you give a stat for the Jets, you better have that counter stat for the Leafs. And it is humorous because I don't give Connor McDavid credit, but all I do is talk about how great Connor McDavid is in the same game. So it is what it is. I love the passion. I even throw it on my Twitter thing that I'm not cheering for or against your team. I was thinking of changing it to I'm the reason your team lost tonight. So, but in all honesty, I'm sitting in that booth hoping that it is end to end, that it's 6-5. And we just have fun and let's go on the ride for 60 minutes, whatever game it is.
I mean, I guess the good part of that is, people care. If they're taking exception because they don't feel like their team is being given enough representation, clearly they care. That's the passionate Canadian audience. I'm wondering, you've spent a lot of time on NBC calling games for the American audience. What's the difference between those two? Do you take a different tact when you're, talking to an American audience versus a Canadian audience?
Well, I guess it's the same tact done differently. You guys have probably noticed I love the roots of the game. I love talking about where guys have come from, and I didn't want to beat them over the head with Nick Foligno's from the Sudbury Wolves, or Jordy Ben played for the Victoria Salsa. But I would talk about the American players and their roots, and so I found that it's funny that the U.S. audience doesn't want to hear as much of that, even though they are in a system where if it was football, they all know where guys played their college and, high school powerhouses and whatever. They like the roots of the game when it involves other sports, but they don't seem to be quite as much on that as hockey, I guess, because we're just it's so part of who we are growing up. So that was one of the only tacks. The same thing, maybe you wouldn't get it quite as much, but they were convinced you were cheering for or against their team as well. Oh, he didn't call. He wasn't as excited for that goal as he was for the other team's goal, so.
What's your impressions been of the North Division? I mean, obviously it was something that was born out of the pandemic, but what are your thoughts of what you've seen? And, do you have a prediction on who might come out of the North?
Well, I've loved it. I've loved this rare opportunity. And for the first month, I thought, man, we might have to make this, happen on more often, or maybe continue on. But as we've gone along, I miss not seeing Alexander Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby. I'm kind of anxious to watch Vegas and Colorado and how they would match up against these teams. So this was born out of necessity. I'm certainly thankful and glad it's happened. And I think in the short term, it's been awesome to watch, the Jets and the Leafs now, going to play 9 times out of 10 and to get to see Connor McDavid on a more regular basis. So it's been great this year. It's great to know one of these teams is going to go to the Final Four. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna walk the fence, not because I don't want to give a prediction. I just find it hard to separate these 3 teams right now. It depends on the week. I mean, Toronto was in Edmonton late in February, early March, and completely dominated the Oilers. It wasn't even close. And a month later, the Oilers are not only more than competitive, they look like the most dangerous team at times. So, last night we saw an injury or two. Who gets the hot goaltending? Who's the healthiest? The goaltending is certainly a big reason why you'd think Winnipeg has a strong chance. McDavid and Draisaitl make you think, wow, the Oilers are the team that's the scariest. And if the Leafs get goaltending, you look at their team and think if Austin Matthews if his wrist is healthy and Jack Campbell's up to the task, or Frederik Andersen comes back, then why can't they be the team? So I think there's a lot to sort out in the next couple months.
CC, it's been such an honor for you to join us here today. Thank you for moving your schedule around. Really great stuff from you. On a personal note, or sorry, more of a selfish note, I'm looking forward to the day that I may be able to host a game with you if they let me into the bullpen to do that with you. I haven't been able to do that yet. I've got a list of broadcasters that I've hoped to work with over the years. Bob Cole was one I was lucky enough to do his second last broadcast. So I'm hoping I get to do one with you. I'm looking forward to that day. But in the meantime, this has sure been a great Chris Cuthbert fix for us here and for our audience. We want to thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure, and maybe that game will have to be in Dallas so we can go back to Ferris Wheelers. Yeah,
Ferris Wheelers.
Ferris Wheelers. We'll do that. I look forward to it, and maybe we'll get to wear those blue jackets one more time together, Sean.
Oh, wouldn't that be something? Oh,
I don't want to talk to Ken because he's got too many holes in one, and I don't have one yet. So,
CC, anyway, this is the year for you. This is the year for you. Have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. See you, CC. Great stuff. That was a lot of fun. I wanted to bring up a couple notes just because he talked about this. He brought up the Victoria Salsa, which was a one-time Junior A team. I just wanted to tell a story about that for a local guy. Dorian Miller was a really, really good hockey player who you probably played against him. Yeah, yep. Led the Junior A in scoring one year. Phenomenal player out of Oakbank, Manitoba, and a really, really nice guy. I remember when I was coming up, I'd see him at socials, and he'd always take the time to talk with me. I believe he's a principal in the city now. But if I remember correctly, there was a point where the Victoria Salsa purchased him off of the Selkirk Steelers for $15,000, which was an astronomical amount of money in the 90s and unheard of. I just thought he brought that up, and I wanted to bring that little tidbit into it. And to go back to CC's story about talking about, hearing some legends and, address you and talk to you, it brought me right back to the first game I ever did with Bob Cole. And I was just blown away to be working with him. And it was me, him, and Gary Galley. And it was at the beginning of the show where he was welcoming in the audience, in that voice of his that's just unbelievable. And I remember the point where he just said, "This is Bob Cole with Gary Galley and Sean Reynolds." And it was just, I was in the middle of the program, and, I've got my telex in my ear where you're hearing the show. And he said that, and it just absolutely sent a lightning bolt up and down my spine to hear Bob Cole say my name in a broadcast. It's really interesting when you get to talk to someone like CC, who we just see these people. And to his point, when you walk into the industry and you think, how good are these guys? I'm never going to get there. all these guys, Chris, who's at this stage just an absolute legend and an all-timer, they all start somewhere and they all have those moments where they meet their heroes and get to work with their heroes. And it just was so neat to go back and hear that story from him.
Oh, just tremendous. And I mean, Bob Cole, another great voice of our generation. My latest Bob Cole was that year in 2016, that playoff series. I believe it was between the Blues and the Sharks. Bob was able to capture everything in the moment. I walked in at the morning skate. I'm standing in the Zamboni door. Let's try to decline that. Sorry, beauty of television, live streaming.
We are
happening.
As raw as it gets, Kenny. Yeah.
Well, hey, but when the phone rings, the phone rings.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so 2-2 series. I'm standing in the Zamboni door. Bob walks in. I say, "Good morning, Bob. How are you today, sir?" Good. In 2 words, he's able to capture everything in the series. The series is 2-2. Game 5 is in St. Louis. He looks at me and says, "Big one." And you didn't have to say anything else. The series was going to be not necessarily won or lost, but those 2 words were, and in that, in those great voice. I mean, I just love, it was just one of those great, small, tiny little interactions that we have with these folks. I had another funny one way back, and when I was covering the Moose, they were playing in St. John's. We're in the Bob Cole press box, and I'm standing in the doorway speaking with the media relations person, and someone kind of jams their, in a leather jacket, kind of jams their way into, I'm standing in the doorway. I mean, just having a casual conversation, and Bob kind of shoos his way in, and I'm turning around. I'm like, what's this guy doing? And I'm like, oh, it's Bob Cole. In his press box. So I think I can move out of the way for Bob in his press box, but it was one of those classic tiny moments in time that, it makes you think of, what Chris was talking about, his start in Yorkton. The things along the way that you get to do. And I started covering sports at the Red River Valley Echo in my hometown, and to think that something that you started at that level, you end up covering the National Hockey League. And for you, Sean, being on Hockey Night in Canada, these are just awesome memories for people that love sports. And just feel so fortunate to be able to do these things and have these conversations. Such an education from Chris as well. That's a voice of your generation, and to find out how, same with Zeiss, the passion that these guys have for their craft. And when people go on the air for a 3-hour broadcast, it doesn't just happen. These guys just don't show up at the rink. Look at that chart. That chart made me think of when I covered the CIS. I had a crazy, I've got the things, you got stats, you got the highlighter out, you got, this guy's the middle linebacker, leads the CIS in tackles. And those things are so much fun to put together, but there's so much work, but you just love it. And you want to have that golden goal moment in a game. And when you're able to call that or write about it or, host a show, and be part of those moments, it's just such a magical thing.
Yeah. Legendary call. And you know what? Legendary show with those guys coming on. I love doing these shows, Kenny. I absolutely love them. I know our numbers lie in those post-game shows, but I have a ton of fun with these every single week. Absolutely love them. Love the audience interaction as well. I got to say, I want to thank our audience today. I know I always thank you for tuning in, but we were talking about the COVID stuff off the top and the quarantine and how that's been. A lot of you shared personal stories, and we really appreciate that. And we're hearing you, some of the people who, had successes, some of the people who had hard times. Hey, thank you for sharing that with us. And if you want to share that kind of stuff with us going forward, feel free. Any way that we can, if there's any, if it's cathartic for you to talk about it in these situations, we're here to listen to that kind of stuff and really appreciate the trust that, a lot of you showed in opening up to us earlier on in the show and that. So let's leave it at that. Let's wrap it up here. Really enjoyed your time, Kenny. Really enjoyed our guest times. Thank you to Chris Cuthbert and Mike Zeisberger, who we'll get back to talking about Ferris wheelers. And you were there, Kenny. We were all there for that. But we'll get back to that.
It's a great barbecue place. For people who are curious, it's a great barbecue place. And we just had a lot of laughs that night.
Yeah.
It's the thing that, again, what we talked about at the start of the show, those are the things that you miss, where you have 15 media people sharing stories. Our friend Arash Madani from Sportsnet was there as well. And that great crew from St. Louis had joined us as well. And you just, those are the moments that you miss out. And we hope that this is another step towards getting those moments back.
You bet. You bet. So one last time, thank you to everyone for tuning in. If you want to catch our stuff, we'll be back here every Friday morning at 9 a.m. having great guests just like that. And other than that, check us out in our pregame shows on Instagram, 45 minutes before the games on my Instagram handle. And after that, postgame shows right where you're watching this right now, either on my Facebook, Ken's Twitter, or on our YouTube page, which is the best place to come check us out. If you're there, click subscribe because we'd love to have you along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have a great day and a great weekend.